when California Governor Gavin Newsom publicly mocked President Donald Trump by calling him Piggy. He expected applause. But what came next turned into one of the funniest political moments of the year. Trump, the 45th and current 47th President of the United States, fired back with a clapback so sharp, so unexpected, and so hilarious that the entire room and the internet erupted. This video breaks down the full exchange, the crowd's reaction, and why Newsom instantly regretted poking Trump. Viewers won't see this punchline coming. The moment Gavin Newsom said it, the entire room changed. It was supposed to be a normal policy briefing in Sacramento. Cameras rolling, reporters typing, lights buzzing overhead. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. But then out of nowhere, with a fake smile stretched across his polished face, Newsom leaned into the microphone and said the one word that would flip the entire political world upside down. Trump is a piggy. There was a strange silence afterward, a silence that didn't feel natural. It felt wrong. Reporters froze mid-typing. Staff members glanced at one another like someone had just walked into a funeral wearing clown shoes. Even the camera operators hesitated, their lenses trembling in their hands. It wasn't the insult itself. People throw words in politics all the time. No, it was the tone he used. Sharp, mocking, calculated. It didn't sound like a joke. It sounded like a man lashing out, because he was terrified of losing control. Within minutes, the clip was flying across X and Truth Social. Every phone in the room buzzed at the same time, creating a faint mechanical vibration that felt like the floor itself was reacting. Comment sections exploded. Memes flew. News anchors scrambled. But behind all that noise, something deeper was happening. Because at that exact moment, down in Washington, inside the West Wing, President Donald J. Trump, the 45th and 47th President of the United States, had just finished signing an executive order and sat back in his chair when Caroline Leavitt rushed in. "Sir," she whispered, breathless, "you're going to want to see this." Trump looked up, puzzled. Caroline almost never looked worried. She was one of the toughest press secretaries in modern history. But right now, she looked like someone who had just watched a car crash happen in slow motion. Trump took the tablet from her hands, and there it was. The clip, the insult, the smirk, the word Piggy echoing through the speakers. For a full 5 seconds, the president didn't move. He didn't blink. He didn't speak. He just stared at the screen with the kind of calm that makes the air thick. The kind of calm that comes right before a storm. Outside the Oval Office windows, the world kept moving. Cars passing, sirens in the distance, tourists taking pictures. But inside that room, something shifted. Because everyone who knew Trump knew this. He never lets lies stand. He never ignores an attack. He never backs down from a fight. But this time felt different. This wasn't just disrespect. This wasn't just politics. This wasn't just Gavin Newsom being petty. This was personal. This hit a nerve that went much deeper, especially after the fake photos, the AI insults, the desperate attempt to stir attention. And Trump had been quiet for just long enough. Caroline swallowed. "Sir, the country is watching." Trump finally exhaled. "Slow, steady, powerful, okay," he said softly. "Let's respond." But no one in that room, not Caroline, not Secret Service, not even Trump himself, knew that what he was about to say would trigger one of the funniest, sharpest, and most emotionally explosive political moments of the entire year. And Gavin Newsom, he had no idea he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. The moment Trump said, "Let's respond," the entire West Wing felt it. Not heard it, felt it. Caroline Leavitt stepped back, her breath tightening. She had seen Trump respond to many political attacks before, but this one carried a different weight. She could sense it in the room, the stillness, the tension, the heaviness in the air. Secret Service agents exchanged glances, whispering silently through their earpieces. Something big was coming. Bigger than a simple comeback. Bigger than a Twitter reply. Bigger than anything Newsom could have imagined. Trump stood up from his chair, slow, controlled, almost eerily calm. He walked to the small table beside the Oval Office windows where he kept a few personal items. An old framed photo of him and his father, a small bronze eagle, and a stack of printed reports about the state of California. Reports he had never publicly commented on, but he had kept them. He picked up the top sheet. Homelessness report, numbers worse than the previous year, worse than the year before that. Trump didn't speak, and that made Caroline even more uneasy. She had learned long ago that Trump's silence was never emptiness. Silence meant calculation. Silence meant strategy. Silence meant someone had poked the wrong lion. A soft knock came at the door. It was Dan Scavino holding his phone tightly in both hands. "Sir," he said, "you need to see this too." Trump took the phone. There it was. The AI-generated memes, the fake images, the photoshopped pig head pictures, the quiet Piggy captions, all organized, posted, and pushed by Gavin Newsom's own office. Trump's jaw didn't clench. His face didn't twist. He didn't show anger. Instead, his eyes softened almost in disbelief. "So this is what they've become," he whispered. Caroline felt her chest tighten. She wasn't emotional often, but seeing Trump like that, calm, disappointed, saddened, shook her because he wasn't reacting out of ego. He wasn't offended for himself. He was offended that someone holding a governor's title behaved like an internet troll. "Sir," Dan said carefully, "it's going viral. Millions of people are laughing at him, not at you. They say it feels desperate." Trump looked up. He set the phone on the desk. "Dan, go prepare Truth Social. Don't post anything yet. I want to think." Dan nodded and stepped out. Caroline stayed frozen in place, hands clasped tightly. Trump walked toward her, his voice softened even more. "Caroline, do you know why this bothers me?" She shook her head. "Because America deserves better than leaders who behave like teenagers hiding behind screens." His eyes glimmered just enough for her to see the hurt beneath the strength. "And because I've spent my whole life fighting for people who needed someone strong, not someone petty." Caroline felt tears sting her eyes. She looked away quickly, embarrassed, but Trump noticed. "Don't cry," he said gently. "We're going to handle this the right way." At that exact moment, across the country, Gavin Newsom was smiling for cameras, completely unaware that Trump wasn't preparing a joke. He was preparing a moment that would shake the nation within the next hour. Across the country, while the West Wing was wrapped in a breathless, almost sacred quiet, the atmosphere in Sacramento couldn't have been more different. Gavin Newsom stood backstage adjusting the cuffs of his perfectly pressed jacket, rehearsing lines he believed would make him look bold, even heroic, after calling the President of the United States Piggy. The staff around him laughed nervously, too nervously. Some of them kept glancing at their phones. Others whispered to each other with stiff shoulders and tight throats. His communications director, a young man with shaky hands, held a tablet close to his chest like he was hiding bad news. But Gavin didn't see any of it. Or maybe he refused to. He was smiling for the cameras, smiling too wide, smiling like a man who thought he just won something. "Did it land well?" he asked casually, fixing his hair in the reflective glass door. Nobody answered. His comms director finally swallowed hard. "Sir, it's trending." Gavin grinned. "Of course it is." The director added softly, "But not in the way you think." Gavin's smile twitched. "What does that mean?" The room fell into a small, suffocating silence. Then the director turned the tablet toward him. Across the screen was a wall of comments, millions of them. But they weren't laughing with Gavin. They were laughing at him. This was unprofessional. Why is a governor talking like a middle school bully? California is burning and he's playing meme games. Trump didn't even respond yet, and Newsom already looks desperate. How is this a leader? The color drained from Gavin's face. His smile collapsed into something tight and uneasy. The expression of a man finally realizing he had stepped off a cliff. He didn't see. He skimmed the trending hashtags. Newsom meltdown, Piggygate backfires, grow up Gavin, and the worst of them all, Trump was right. His throat tightened. A staffer in the corner whispered to another, thinking Gavin couldn't hear. He thought Trump would get mad. He thought this would explode in his favor, but the public thinks it's childish. Another responded, and Trump hasn't even spoken yet. When he responds, we are finished. Gavin felt the words like cold water down his spine. He licked his lips, panicked. Okay, let's prepare a clarification. Something like it was satire. No one will believe that, a senior aide said gently. Sir, the clip looks angry, mean, not playful. Gavin's heart dropped. He turned toward the press room doors. Behind them, dozens of reporters waited. Cameras were ready. Live feeds were already rolling. He had planned to walk out confidently. Now suddenly his hands wouldn't stop shaking. His phone buzzed. A notification, Truth Social alert. Donald J. Trump is preparing a statement. Gavin froze. Every staff member in the room looked up at him, their eyes widening with fear because they all knew something he didn't want to admit. If Trump responded with the lightest tap, even the tiniest joke, Gavin would shatter. And somewhere in the White House at that very moment, Donald Trump was taking a single breath before delivering a clapback that would echo across the country. Back in Washington, the quiet inside the Oval Office had turned into something heavier, something that felt almost alive. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second echoing like a drumbeat in a stadium, holding its breath. Trump stood at the center of the room, not behind his desk, not on the phone, not packing, just standing still. A stillness so unusual that even the Secret Service agents outside the door stopped speaking to each other. Caroline Leavitt watched him carefully. She wasn't afraid of much. But moments like this, when Trump became deeply thoughtful, always made her chest tighten with emotion. Because that expression, the one he wore now, wasn't anger. It was disappointment. And that somehow felt even heavier. Dan Scavino stepped back into the room holding a printout. "Sir, these are the numbers from the last 30 minutes. Trump didn't speak. He lifted his chin slightly, his eyes telling Dan to continue. Dan swallowed. "Sir, every clip of Newsom calling you Piggy is getting ratioed. And the comments, they're not mocking you. They're destroying him." Trump took the printout, scanning it slowly. Comment after comment. Thousands, then tens of thousands. This is embarrassing. California needs a leader, not a meme lord. Why insult the president instead of fixing your state? Trump hasn't even responded yet and he already won. Caroline stepped closer. "Sir, America is watching how you handle this." Trump looked out the window, the sky outside, a pale winter gray, sunlight struggling to break through. He exhaled long and controlled. "I know," he said softly. He walked to his desk, sat down, and placed both hands on the surface as if anchoring himself. For a moment, he closed his eyes, not in weakness, but in focus. "You know," Trump said gently, "I've dealt with world leaders who tried to intimidate me. I've dealt with the press, with investigations, with everything. But this," he opened his eyes, the fire returning. "This is child's play. What bothers me is what it shows about the state of leadership in America." Caroline nodded, her eyes glistening. "Then maybe, sir, your response should show what real leadership looks like." Trump looked at her for a second, just a second. Something emotional flickered in his expression. A softness, a pain, a pride, a weight that only a president could carry. Then he nodded. He turned to Dan. "Prepare the camera crew. Not big, just the usual small team. 15 minutes. Dan's eyebrows shot up. "Sir, you want to do this on camera?" Trump smiled. Not a big smile, but a knowing one. "Yes. Newsom tried to use the internet to shame me. I'll use the truth to humble him." Caroline's breath caught. "And what will you say, sir?" Trump leaned back, folding his hands across his chest. "Oh," he said calmly, "I'll simply remind America who's actually working for them and who's hiding behind memes." He stood again, stronger this time. "Let's go make history." And somewhere in Sacramento, Gavin Newsom felt a sudden chill run through him, though he had no idea why. 15 minutes felt like 15 seconds. Inside the small White House media room, the one reserved for tight, controlled, serious messages, the atmosphere was nothing short of electric. Staffers moved with fast, sharp motions. Lights were being checked, microphones adjusted, cables taped down. Everything needed to be perfect because Donald J. Trump wasn't just preparing a response. He was preparing a moment. Dan Scavino stood by the main camera, hands shaking just slightly. He'd filmed Trump hundreds of times through victories, rallies, debates, and breaking news. But something about tonight, something about the way Trump carried himself made Dan's chest thump harder than usual. Caroline stood beside him, arms crossed, trying to steady her breathing. She wasn't scared. She just knew what a turning point felt like. And this right now felt like a hinge in history. Trump's footsteps echoed softly down the hallway. Everyone froze. He entered without saying a word. No dramatic flair, no smirk, no flashing confidence, just calm, grounded presence. the kind that made rooms stand still. He slipped off his coat, handed it to a staffer, adjusted his red tie, and stepped in front of the backdrop. The American flag stood on each side, glowing gently under the lights. Caroline stepped forward quietly. "Sir, this is rolling as soon as you nod." Trump nodded, then paused. His eyes scanned the small group around him. Dan, Caroline, two cameramen, a sound tech, and a young intern holding her clipboard so tightly her knuckles were white. Then he said something none of them expected. "Before we start, I want you all to know something." The room stiffened. "I'm not doing this because he insulted me. I've been insulted every day since I came down that escalator in 2015. I'm used to it. It doesn't move me." His voice softened, almost breaking. "I'm doing this because millions of Americans deserve to see a leader stand tall, not crawl down to petty levels." Caroline swallowed hard, blinking fast. Trump continued, "People are hurting in this country. Prices are high. Families are worried. Soldiers, cops, truckers, teachers. They depend on leadership that's serious. And when a governor acts like a child mocking instead of working, someone has to raise the bar." He looked at the flag beside him, then back at the camera. His voice steadied. "And I'm going to raise it." Dan felt tears prick his eyes, not because of sadness, but because he was witnessing something rare. A moment where power and humility touched at the same time. Trump rolled his shoulders, exhaled slowly, and said, "All right, Dan, let's go." The camera light blinked red. The room fell silent. Trump leaned slightly toward the microphone, calm as still water. Meanwhile, across the country, Gavin Newsom was stepping up to his press podium at the exact same second, unaware he was about to be obliterated in a way politics hadn't seen in years. His team stood behind him, their faces ghost pale, praying that somehow the damage could still be contained. But they all knew the truth. Trump was speaking, and when Trump speaks, the world listens. The red camera light blinked steadily in front of Donald Trump, a tiny dot but one that carried the weight of millions of eyes waiting behind it. The room around him was silent enough to hear the soft hum of the ceiling lights. It wasn't a rally crowd. It wasn't a debate stage. It wasn't a press ambush. This was something more intimate, more controlled, more dangerous. Trump placed his hands gently on the podium. Not clenched, not stiff, relaxed, grounded, almost fatherly. Caroline stood off to the side, her heart pounding so hard she could feel her pulse in her fingertips. Dan mouthed the countdown. 3, 2, 1. The recording went live. Trump didn't speak immediately. He let the silence breathe, a tactic only the most confident leaders ever mastered. It made viewers lean in, made them stare closer, made them whisper, "What's he about to say?" Meanwhile, at that exact same second, Gavin Newsom was stepping up to his press podium in Sacramento. Reporters filled the room. Cameras flashed. Assistants scurried around him, whispering panicked instructions he wasn't fully hearing. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Another buzz and another. He ignored it or tried to. He forced a smile as he gripped the sides of the podium. "Good evening, everyone." A reporter called out immediately, blunt and ruthless. "Governor, do you regret calling President Trump Piggy?" Another shouted over him, "Governor, are you aware the clip is being mocked nationwide?" Another, "Governor, do you know President Trump is responding right now?" Gavin's throat went dry. He glanced at his staff. They said nothing, their faces pale, their eyes wide, as if they were watching a building fall in slow motion. He turned back to the cameras, forced a smile, but his voice trembled. "Well, I mean, my comments were satire, a joke, playful." But the reporters didn't laugh, not even a smirk. Back in Washington, the scene was the opposite. Trump finally leaned forward. "Good evening, America." Those two words alone hit the internet like a shockwave. On Truth Social, views skyrocketed. YouTube live streams flashed comments like fireworks. Even people who didn't follow politics clicked in out of curiosity. Trump continued, his voice calm, steady. "These past few days have been important for our country. We've seen a lot of noise, a lot of games, and a lot of distractions, but I want to speak to you directly. Not as a Republican, not as a politician, but as your president." Caroline felt her breath catch. His tone was soft but powerful, firm but almost emotional. Across the country, Newsom tried to speak again, but reporters interrupted him with more questions. "Governor, Americans say your comments were childish. Governor, your own donors are condemning the video. Governor, why mock the president instead of addressing California's issues?" The room was collapsing around him. At that same moment, Trump looked straight into the lens, into the eyes of every American watching, and gently shook his head. What happened today wasn't leadership. Caroline swallowed a sob she didn't expect, because she knew he was about to land the blow heard across America. The moment Trump said what happened today wasn't leadership, the White House media room felt like it exhaled and held its breath at the same time. Caroline tightened her grip on the edge of the podium she stood behind. She could feel something building, something powerful, something dignified, something only a steady leader could deliver. And she knew deep down this was the moment the entire country would replay 1,000 times before the night ended. Trump continued, his voice low but firm, almost fatherly. "A governor isn't supposed to mock people. A governor is supposed to help people, especially when their state is hurting." He didn't name Newsom. He didn't need to. Every viewer watching felt the weight behind the words. Meanwhile, across the country, Gavin Newsom was unraveling faster than anyone expected. His press secretary slid a phone toward him on the podium. "Governor," she whispered urgently, "you need to see this." Newsom's eyes darted down. His jaw tightened when he saw the headline flashing across every major platform. "Trump responds live. What happened today wasn't leadership." Under it were thousands of comments. Furious Californians, disappointed moderates, Democrats distancing themselves, independents shaking their heads. His palms went sweaty. Reporters' hands shot up. "Governor, millions are watching the president's reply right now. How do you respond to the criticism that your remarks were unpresidential? Governor, your office released AI images mocking the president. Was that appropriate? Governor, are you losing support from your own base?" Newsom swallowed hard. He wasn't prepared for this. He lifted his mic and tried to sound composed, but the tremble returned. Let's stay focused here. My comments were meant to be." A reporter cut in sharply. "Were they helpful to Californians?" Behind him, one of his staffers lowered her eyes and quietly stepped back. Another wiped sweat off his forehead. A third whispered to a colleague he shouldn't have said that. "Not today. Not like this." Back in Washington, Trump spoke again. Still calm, still controlled. "We have real problems in this country. Families struggling with bills, crime hurting communities, veterans who deserve better. And instead of focusing on solutions, someone thought it was okay to throw insults." He paused again, let the silence echo. Caroline felt something tug in her chest. The honesty, the steadiness, the clarity. It wasn't just political. It was personal, it was protective. Trump glanced at the flag beside him. "That's not how we lead, and that's not how we treat the American people." Those last words vibrated through living rooms across the country. Soldiers overseas stopped scrolling. Factory workers paused mid-shift. Mothers in kitchens leaned closer to their phones. The sincerity felt real. At the same moment, Newsom's phone buzzed again, this time in rapid bursts. His eyes flicked down. Leaked internal poll numbers, donor messages, a text from his own strategist. "This is getting bad, stop talking." But it was too late. He'd poked the wrong giant at the wrong moment. And Donald Trump was just getting warmed up. The country seemed to hold its breath. Trump's calm, measured tone echoed through millions of screens, living rooms, break rooms, taxis, fire stations, army bases. The words weren't angry. They weren't loud. They were steady, almost gentle, and somehow that made them hit even harder. Caroline watched Trump from the corner of the room, her hands clasped so tightly she could feel her fingers going numb. She had seen him furious. She had seen him confident. She had seen him sharp. But she had never seen him like this. Quiet, controlled, deeply serious. It was the kind of tone a father uses when he's not mad, just disappointed. Across the country in Sacramento, the atmosphere was the complete opposite. Chaos. Reporters crowded closer to the podium, shouting overlapping questions. Cameras zoomed in aggressively. Newsom's staffers tried to pull him aside, but the room had turned into a whirlpool he couldn't escape. "Governor, why insult the president? instead of addressing California's issues. Governor, donors are withdrawing funds. Is this the biggest mistake of your career? Governor, Americans say your remarks were disrespectful. Do you apologize? Newsom's voice cracked. Look, I think people are twisting. But another reporter cut him off mercilessly. No one twisted your words. You said it. You tweeted it. Your team mocked him. Governor, was this presidential behavior from someone aiming for 2028? The room shook with murmurs. Camera shutters snapped like firecrackers. And all the while, Newsom's phone kept buzzing, buzzing, buzzing. Messages from allies. This is spiraling. From donors. We're pulling back until this cools. From strategists. Trump's tone is killing us. You need to stop talking. His stomach dropped. Back in the White House, Trump lifted his chin slightly, eyes steady on the camera. Americans deserve leaders who don't hide behind cheap insults. They deserve leaders who show respect, not just to me, but to them. His voice softened again. And when a governor decides to mock instead of serve, it tells you everything you need to know about priorities. Dan filming felt a sting behind his eyes. He wasn't expecting to get emotional, but something about hearing Trump speak like this with sincerity instead of showmanship hit deep. Caroline blinked away tears she didn't want anyone to see. It wasn't sadness. It was pride. Trump continued slowly, his voice almost heartbreaking. In life, you don't lead by tearing people down. You lead by lifting people up, even the people who disagree with you. Across the country, a veteran in Ohio paused mid-repair on his truck. A single mother in Georgia stopped stirring her pot on the stove. A retired teacher in Arizona put her glasses down on her Bible. They all felt it. It wasn't politics anymore. It was humanity. Meanwhile, Newsom stared at a reporter who asked quietly, "Governor, do you regret it?" For the first time, there was no answer. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Because in that moment, he knew he wasn't competing with a politician. He was competing with a president. Trump's video kept rolling, and by now, millions were glued to it like it was a national emergency broadcast. But it wasn't chaos he was speaking into. It was confusion, disappointment, and a hunger for decency. He spoke softly, but the softness felt like steel. And to every young person watching, Trump continued, "I want you to know something. You don't win by mocking others. You win by working hard, staying honest, and respecting the people you serve." Caroline's eyes brimmed again. It wasn't just presidential. It was moral. It was fatherly. It was exactly the tone America hadn't heard from a leader in years. Behind the camera, Dan could feel his chest tightening. Not from sadness, from pride, the kind that swells so large it becomes painful. He whispered under his breath, "Sir, this is going to break the internet." And it was. On TikTok, teenagers stitched Trump's words, shocked that he wasn't shouting but teaching. On Facebook, grandmothers prayed over their screens. On Truth Social, comments exploded. This is real leadership. On YouTube, live stream chats flew like lightning. The entire country felt the same strange thing. A calm before a storm they didn't see coming. Meanwhile, back in Sacramento, Gavin Newsom was sinking. He stood still, sweat beading at the top of his forehead, his smile cracking like thin glass under pressure. A reporter raised her hand but didn't wait to be called on. "Governor, President Trump's message has already reached 8 million views in the last 10 minutes. People say your comments were disrespectful and immature. Do you want to respond?" Newsom licked his lips nervously. "Well, I think people misunderstood the—" Another reporter cut him off sharply. "No one misunderstood. You called the president Piggy publicly. You released AI images mocking him. And now the president is speaking like a statesman while you're making excuses." The room murmured again, low, sharp cutting. His own staff exchanged glances, scared, defeated, drained. One pressed his hand to his forehead. Another quietly whispered, "This is getting worse." Then a moment happened that shattered Gavin Newsom completely. A reporter at the back, someone from a California local outlet, not even a national one, raised her voice. "Governor, California is struggling. Homelessness, crime, people leaving the state. Why insult the president during a crisis instead of focusing on your own responsibilities?" Newsom froze, because the room went silent, dead silent. Not one staffer stepped forward to defend him. Not one person laughed like he expected earlier. Everyone was watching him come undone in real time. Back in the White House, Trump prepared to close his message. But Caroline saw something in his eyes. A glimmer, a spark, the moment before a punchline, the moment before a knockout blow. Trump rested his hands lightly on the podium. "And now," he said gently, "I want to address what was said about me today." Caroline's breath caught. Dan blinked. The room stilled. The entire nation leaned forward. Gavin Newsom gripped the sides of his podium thousands of miles away. He had no idea. He was 3 seconds away from the most devastating clapback of the year. The world felt frozen. Trump stood still, his hands resting gently on the podium, the lights warm on his shoulders. Caroline stopped breathing for a second. Dan lowered his camera slightly, knowing something unforgettable was coming. Trump looked directly into the lens. Not with anger, not with irritation, but with the calm confidence of someone who already won the moment. So he said slowly, "I heard that today someone called me Piggy." In Sacramento, Gavin Newsom jerked his head up. Every reporter turned toward him like a pack of wolves, sensing weakness. Trump continued, "Now, folks, I've been called a lot of names in my life. A lot. The fake news has a dictionary just for me." People online laughed. The comments exploded. Trump squeezed his lips together, pretending to think. "But Piggy, that's a new one." Caroline cracked a smile. Dan bit his knuckle to keep from laughing. "But let me tell you something," Trump said, voice rising slightly. "If a governor who ran his state into the ground, lost businesses, lost people, lost control, wants to call me Piggy." He paused. The entire world leaned in. "Then maybe someone should remind him." His hand tapped the podium. "That I'm the one eating up his poll numbers." Boom! Caroline slapped a hand over her mouth. Dan doubled over laughing behind the camera. Reporters gasped. The internet exploded in real time. Memes, clips, hashtags, everything. Trump wasn't done. "And let's be honest," he added, lowering his voice again. "If anybody's been hogging things, it's the governor of California hogging excuses for why his state keeps falling apart." Another explosion of laughter across the nation. Even people who didn't like Trump cracked a smile. Trump smiled softly. Not smug, not mean, just amused, controlled, presidential. "But listen," he said, "I don't hate anyone. I really don't. I want every governor, even the ones who insult me, to succeed because when they fail, real Americans suffer, and I love this country too much to enjoy anyone failing." Caroline's eyes filled again. Dan wiped his face. And far away in Sacramento, Gavin Newsom felt his heart sink to a place he didn't know existed. Because the room didn't laugh with him, they laughed at him. One reporter whispered, "Oh my God." Another shook her head. A staffer slowly removed his hand from Newsom's back. He whispered what everyone else already knew. "Governor, he destroyed you." Newsom lowered his gaze, understanding that his little piggy joke had turned into the biggest political misfire of the year. Meanwhile, in the White House, Trump finished with a final sincere line. A line that made millions tear up. "America deserves better than insults. America deserves truth, strength, and real leadership. And as long as I'm serving you, that's exactly what I'll give." He stepped back, the video ended, and the country erupted. Within seconds, the video was everywhere. It wasn't just trending, it was dominating. Every platform, every news site, every social media feed, every group chat lit up with the same thing: Trump's response. On Truth Social, the post hit 5 million views in under 2 minutes. People shared it with captions like "This is leadership. Watch how a president responds," and "Newsom just got schooled." On X, formerly Twitter, the clip was pinned at the top of trending topics worldwide. Not just in America, worldwide. People in London, Tokyo, Sydney, Paris were watching Trump's measured, powerful response and comparing it to Newsom's childish insult. On YouTube, reaction channels scrambled to get their cameras on. Conservative commentators praised the dignity. Liberal analysts grudgingly admitted it was effective. Even people who disagreed with Trump's policies had to acknowledge the sheer composure he displayed. But the most powerful reactions came from everyday Americans, the people Trump spoke to directly. the people he said he was protecting. In Ohio, that veteran who had paused mid-repair on his truck wiped his hands on a rag and replayed the video. His wife leaned over his shoulder, watching silently. When it ended, she whispered, "That's the kind of man I want leading this country." In Georgia, the single mother stirring her pot set down her wooden spoon and sat at her kitchen table. Her 2 kids were doing homework nearby. She covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her face. Not from sadness, from relief. Relief that someone in power still cared about decency. In Arizona, the retired teacher picked up her phone and called her daughter. "Honey," she said, "you need to watch this. I don't care what side you're on. This is how leaders should act." Back in Sacramento, the press room had descended into complete pandemonium. Reporters were no longer asking questions. They were demanding answers. Cameras were zooming in on Newsom's face, capturing every bead of sweat, every nervous blink, every tightening of his jaw. "Governor," a reporter shouted, "President Trump just said you're hogging excuses. Do you have a response?" "Governor," another yelled, "he said he's eating up your poll numbers. Is that accurate?" "Governor, do you regret this entire situation?" Newsom tried to speak, but his voice came out hoarse. "Look, I think we need to remember that." But nobody was listening. His own staff had started backing away from the podium. One of them was on the phone, likely with a crisis management team. Another was frantically typing on a laptop. A third had her face buried in her hands. His communications director leaned in close, whispering urgently into Newsom's ear, "Sir, we need to leave. Now. This is spiraling out of control." But Newsom couldn't move. He was frozen, trapped in the spotlight of his own making. His mind replayed Trump's words over and over. "I'm the one eating up his poll numbers. Hogging excuses. America deserves better than insults." Every word was a dagger. Every pause was a hammer blow. Every smile from Trump was a mirror reflecting Newsom's own pettiness back at him. A reporter at the front, a woman from a major California newspaper, stood up slowly. Her voice was calm but devastating. "Governor Newsom," she said, "you have spent the last year positioning yourself as a potential presidential candidate. You've criticized President Trump repeatedly. You've called for new leadership. But after today, after this exchange, do you honestly believe the American people will see you as presidential material?" The room went silent. Every eye turned to Newsom. Every camera zoomed in. Every microphone leaned forward. Newsom opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He tried again. Still nothing. His lips moved, but no sound followed. It was the look of a man who had just realized he'd thrown away his political future over a childish insult. Finally, he managed to whisper, I think we should wrap this up." But even as he said it, his phone buzzed again. And again. And again. He glanced down at the screen. The notifications were relentless. Breaking news alerts, poll numbers dropping, donors backing out, colleagues distancing themselves, editorial boards calling for apologies, late-night shows preparing segments mocking him. And then the one that made his stomach drop completely. A text from a senior Democratic strategist, someone who had been advising him on a potential 2028 run. It read, "Call me immediately. We need damage control. This might be unrecoverable." Newsom's hand shook. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked up at the reporters. "I have no further comment at this time," he said quietly. And then he walked off the stage. The cameras followed him. The reporters shouted after him. His staff scrambled to keep up. But Gavin Newsom, the man who had called the President of the United States Piggy just hours earlier, was retreating. Not strategically, not confidently, but in defeat. Back in the White House, the mood was entirely different. The small media room had erupted into quiet celebration. Staffers were hugging each other. Dan Scavino was grinning ear to ear. Caroline Leavitt was wiping tears from her face, but they were tears of pride, not sadness. Trump had stepped away from the podium and was shaking hands with the camera crew. "Good work, everyone," he said warmly. "Thank you for making this happen." A young intern, the one who had been clutching her clipboard so tightly, approached him nervously. "Mr. President," she said, her voice trembling. That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen." Trump smiled at her. Not the big, flashy smile he used at rallies, but a soft, kind smile. The kind a grandfather gives. "Thank you," he said gently. "But remember, it's not about being incredible. It's about being honest." The intern nodded, her eyes glistening. Caroline walked over to Trump, her arms folded across her chest, a proud smile on her face. "Sir," she said, "you just changed the entire narrative of this year." Trump chuckled. "Maybe. But more importantly, I reminded people what leadership is supposed to look like." Dan approached with his phone. "Sir, you need to see this." Trump took the phone and scrolled through the comments. Millions of them, flooding in from every corner of the country, from every demographic, from people who voted for him and people who didn't. "This is what a president sounds like. I didn't vote for Trump, but I respect this. Newsom got destroyed with kindness. This is the difference between a leader and a politician." Trump handed the phone back to Dan. "Good," he said simply. "That's what America needed to hear." As the team began packing up equipment, Trump walked over to the window overlooking the White House lawn. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grass. The city beyond was bustling, unaware of the political earthquake that had just occurred. Caroline joined him at the window. "Sir," she said softly, "do you think he'll apologize?" Trump was quiet for a moment, then he shook his head. "No," he said, "men like that don't apologize. They double down or they hide. But it doesn't matter. The American people already made up their minds." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Caroline, I want you to remember something. Power isn't about humiliating your opponents. It's about standing firm in your principles and letting your actions speak louder than their insults." Caroline nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "Yes, sir." Trump smiled. "Now let's get back to work. We've got a country to run." And with that, he walked out of the media room, leaving behind a moment that would be studied, analyzed, and remembered for years to come. Meanwhile, across the country, Gavin Newsom sat alone in his office. The lights were dim. His staff had left him alone at his request. His phone sat face down on the desk, still buzzing with notifications he refused to check. He stared at the wall, replaying the entire day in his mind. The insult, the laughter from his staff, the confident walk to the podium, the reporters' questions, Trump's response, the poll numbers, the text messages, the retreat. He had thought he was being clever. He had thought he was being bold. He had thought he was landing a punch that would make headlines and boost his profile. Instead, he had walked straight into a trap of his own making. And Donald Trump, the man he had tried to mock, had responded not with anger but with grace, not with insults but with leadership, not with pettiness but with dignity. And in doing so, Trump had done something far more devastating than any insult ever could. He had made Newsom look small. Newsom leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his own mistakes pressing down on him. And he knew, deep down, that this moment would follow him for the rest of his political career. In living rooms across America, families gathered around their screens. Parents showed their children the video. Teachers planned to use it as a lesson in civics classes. Pastors referenced it in sermons about grace and dignity. Coaches used it as an example of how to handle adversity with class. Because what Trump did that day wasn't just a political response. It was a masterclass in leadership, a reminder that strength doesn't come from tearing others down. It comes from lifting yourself and your principles up, even when others try to drag you into the mud. And as the sun set on that historic day, one thing became crystal clear to everyone watching. Gavin Newsom had picked a fight he couldn't win, not because Trump was stronger, not because Trump was louder, but because Trump understood something Newsom never did. Real power doesn't need to prove itself. It simply is. The days following Trump's response felt like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. Every hour brought a new development. Every news cycle added another layer to the story. And with each passing moment, the gap between Trump's composed leadership and Newsom's reckless insult grew wider. By the next morning, every major news outlet in America had led with the story. Even networks that typically criticized Trump had to acknowledge the effectiveness of his response. CNN ran a segment titled, Trump's measured response surprises critics. MSNBC featured a panel discussion where even the most liberal commentators admitted he had handled it well. Fox News, predictably, played the clip on a loop, with hosts praising Trump's restraint and wit. But the real impact wasn't coming from the media. It was coming from the people. Social media had exploded overnight. The hashtag #LeadershipMatters was trending #1 worldwide. Millions of people were sharing the clip alongside their own stories about what real leadership meant to them. Veterans talked about commanders who led by example. Teachers discussed educators who inspired rather than belittled. Business owners shared stories of mentors who built them up instead of tearing them down. The contrast couldn't have been starker. On one side, Trump's calm, dignified response that elevated the conversation. On the other, Newsom's petty insult that diminished it. And America was making its choice clear. In Sacramento, Newsom's office was in full crisis mode. His senior staff had been in emergency meetings since 4 in the morning. His communications team was drafting and redrafting statements, none of which felt right. His political advisors were reviewing polling data that got worse by the hour. The numbers were devastating. Newsom's favorability rating in California had dropped 12 points overnight. Among independents, it had plummeted 17 points. Even among Democrats, his support had softened significantly. The phrases most commonly associated with him in overnight polling were unprofessional, petty, and disappointing. But the worst news came from national polling. His hypothetical 2028 presidential numbers had cratered. In a field of potential Democratic candidates, he had dropped from second place to sixth. And in head-to-head matchups against potential Republican candidates, he was now losing by double digits across the board. His chief strategist, a woman named Rebecca who had been with him since his days as San Francisco mayor, sat across from him in his office. Her expression was grave. "Governor," she said quietly, "we need to talk about the path forward." Newsom looked up from his desk. His eyes were bloodshot. He hadn't slept. "Go ahead," he said, his voice hoarse. Rebecca took a deep breath. "Sir, the damage from yesterday is significant. More significant than anything we anticipated. We're not just talking about bad press or a news cycle. We're talking about a fundamental shift in how people perceive you." She slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printouts of polling data, focus group transcripts, and social media analytics. All of it painted the same picture. Newsom had damaged his brand, perhaps irreparably. "The focus groups are particularly brutal," Rebecca continued. "People used words like juvenile, mean-spirited, and unbecoming of a leader. And these weren't Republicans. These were Democrats and independents." Newsom flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening with each one. "What do we do?" he asked quietly. Rebecca leaned forward. "We have 3 options. 1, you issue a full apology. Not a clarification, not a sorry if people were offended statement. A real, genuine apology that acknowledges the mistake and commits to better." Newsom's eyes flashed. "That makes me look weak." Rebecca didn't flinch. "Sir, with respect, you already look weak. The question is whether you look weak and stubborn or weak and capable of growth." Newsom was silent. "Option 2, Rebecca continued, is you lean into it. Double down, claim it was all satire, attack Trump back, and hope your base rallies around you. And option 3, Newsom asked, you go silent. No more comments about Trump. No more press conferences for a while. You focus entirely on California policy wins and let this blow over naturally. It'll take months, maybe longer, but eventually people move on." Newsom stared at the folder. None of the options felt good. All of them felt like surrender. Across the country in Washington, Trump's day was proceeding normally. He had moved on from the Newsom incident entirely. There was work to do, and he was doing it. Meetings with cabinet members, calls with foreign leaders, policy briefings. The presidency didn't pause for political theater. But Caroline noticed something throughout the day. People seemed different around Trump. Staffers walked a little taller. Secret Service agents nodded a little more respectfully. Even members of Congress who came in for meetings seemed more deferential. It was subtle, but it was there. The Newsom response had reminded everyone of something they sometimes forgot. Trump knew how to wield power without crushing people with it. He knew how to win without making it personal. He knew how to lead. Late that afternoon, Caroline was in the Oval Office reviewing Trump's schedule for the following day when he looked up from his desk. "Caroline," he said, "have you heard anything from California?" She nodded. "Yes, sir. Their team is in crisis mode. Polling is terrible. Focus groups are worse. From what I'm hearing, they're debating whether he should apologize." Trump nodded slowly. "He will or he won't. Either way, it doesn't change what happened. The American people saw both of us at the same time, handling the same situation differently. That's all that matters." Caroline smiled. "Sir, I have to say, I've never seen anything quite like your response yesterday. The way you handled it." Trump waved his hand dismissively. "I just told the truth, Caroline. That's all any leader should do." "But sir," Caroline continued, "you did more than that. You elevated the entire conversation. You turned something petty into something meaningful. You reminded people what leadership actually looks like." Trump was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that surprised her. "You know what the hardest part of this job is, Caroline?" She shook her head. "It's not the policy decisions. It's not the long hours. It's not even the constant attacks." Trump leaned back in his chair. "It's remembering that everything you do, everything you say, everything you choose not to do or not to say, it all matters. Because people are watching. Kids are watching. Parents are watching. Teachers, soldiers, cops, everyone. They're looking for someone to show them how to handle adversity with dignity." Caroline felt her eyes well up again. "Yes, sir." Trump smiled. "That's why I couldn't just fire back with an insult. That's why I couldn't stoop to his level. Because the moment I do that, I'm telling every young person in America that it's okay to be petty, that it's okay to mock instead of lead. And I won't do that." Caroline nodded, unable to speak. Trump turned back to his paperwork. "Now, let's get back to work. We've got a country to run, and I don't have time to worry about people who don't understand what leadership means." And just like that, the conversation was over. Trump had moved on, because that's what leaders do. They handle the crisis, they deliver the message, and then they get back to work. But across the country, millions of Americans hadn't moved on. They were still talking about it, still sharing the video, still comparing the two men, still learning from what they had witnessed. In Ohio, that veteran had shared Trump's response video with his entire VFW post. They watched it together in their meeting hall, and when it ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. One of the older veterans, a man who had served in Vietnam, stood up slowly. "That," he said, his voice shaking, "is the kind of commander-in-chief we need. Someone who doesn't lose his cool. Someone who remembers his dignity even when others forget theirs." The room erupted in applause. In Georgia, that single mother had shown the video to her kids. Her teenage son, who usually rolled his eyes at anything political, watched it twice. "Mom," he said afterward, "that's actually pretty cool." He didn't get mad. He just said what needed to be said. His mother hugged him. "That's what I want you to remember, honey. When people try to bring you down, you don't have to fight dirty. You just have to stand firm." In Arizona, the retired teacher had sent the video to her entire book club. They discussed it for 2 hours, comparing it to historical examples of leadership under pressure. Lincoln's measured responses during the Civil War, Reagan's calm during the assassination attempt, Kennedy's composure during the Cuban Missile Crisis. "This belongs in that conversation," one woman said. "This is going to be in textbooks someday." The ripple effects continued to spread. Political science professors assigned their students to analyze the exchange. Communication experts broke down Trump's rhetorical techniques. Leadership consultants used it as a case study in crisis management. But perhaps the most meaningful reactions came from unexpected places. From people who had never supported Trump before. From independents who had been skeptical of him. From Democrats who disagreed with his policies but couldn't deny the effectiveness of his response. On a popular left-leaning political podcast, the host spent an entire episode discussing the incident. "Look," one of them said, "I'm not a Trump fan. You all know that. But we have to be honest here. He handled that masterfully. He could have destroyed Newsom with insults. He could have gone nuclear. Instead, he took the high road and somehow made it look easy." His co-host nodded. And that's what's so frustrating. Because now Newsom looks terrible and Trump looks presidential, and we can't even argue with it because it's true. The podcast received thousands of comments, many from listeners who felt the same way, conflicted, impressed despite themselves, forced to acknowledge that leadership transcends party lines. Back in Sacramento, Newsom was watching his world crumble. Major donors were calling to say they needed to reassess their commitments. Congressional colleagues were avoiding his calls. State legislators were quietly distancing themselves. The California media, which had largely been friendly to him, was now running critical pieces about his judgment. The worst call came from a longtime friend, someone who had known him since his earliest days in politics. Gavin, the friend, said, "I need to be honest with you. What you did, calling the president that name, it's not who you are. Or at least it's not who I thought you were. And I think a lot of people feel the same way." Newsom tried to defend himself, but the words felt hollow even to his own ears. His friend continued, "You've always been about ideas, about policy, about vision. But yesterday you sounded like a Twitter troll. And people don't want a Twitter troll running the country. They want a leader. And Trump, whether we like it or not, he reminded everyone what a leader looks like." The call ended shortly after. Newsom sat in his office, the silence deafening. His phone had finally stopped buzzing, not because the crisis was over, but because people had stopped reaching out. They had written him off. He pulled up Trump's response video on his computer and watched it again, really watched it this time. He studied Trump's body language, the calm posture, the steady voice, the lack of anger or vindictiveness, the elevation of the conversation rather than the destruction of an opponent. And for the first time, Newsom understood what he had done wrong. He hadn't just insulted the president. He had revealed something about himself that people couldn't unsee. He had shown that when challenged, when frustrated, when feeling threatened, his instinct was to lash out rather than lead. Trump's instinct, on the other hand, had been the opposite: to steady, to teach, to remind people of what mattered. Newsom closed the laptop and put his head in his hands. He had wanted to make Trump look small. Instead, he had made himself disappear. Days turned into weeks, and the story evolved but never quite went away. Other news cycles came and went, but the Newsom-Trump exchange remained a touchstone, a reference point, a before and after moment in how people discussed political leadership. Newsom eventually issued a statement. Not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement that his comments had been unnecessarily personal, and that he regretted the distraction from important policy discussions. It was carefully worded, focus-grouped, and ultimately ineffective. People saw through it. Trump never mentioned Newsom again. He didn't need to. The contrast had been established. The lesson had been taught. Anything more would have been unnecessary. But in quiet moments, in homes and offices and classrooms across America, people kept talking about it. Parents used it to teach their children about dignity. Teachers used it to illustrate effective communication. Counselors used it to discuss conflict resolution. Because what had started as a petty political insult had transformed into something much bigger. A national conversation about what leadership actually means. About the difference between power and pettiness, about the choice everyone faces when challenged, to descend or to rise. And in that conversation, two men had provided the clearest possible contrast, one who chose to mock, one who chose to lead. History would remember both responses, but only one would be remembered as presidential. Now, my dear viewers watching this powerful story, if this moment moved you, if you felt the emotion, the strength, the leadership, please like this video. Drop a comment to support the channel. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story, and join our membership to unlock exclusive content made just for you. Your support keeps this channel alive. Your engagement helps our message grow. Let's keep building this community together.